So I have the Celtics at number 3 in my power rankings. Here is an off-season recap. They lost Malcolm Brogdon, Danilo Gallinari, Blake Griffin, Mike Muscala, Marcus Smart, Grant Williams, and Robert Williams. Grant Williams is the one there. Like, I'm not as worried about Robert Williams because I think they're better when they go 5 out, and Porzingis kind of brings that option, right? Grant Williams, I think Grant Williams was not as necessary last year. And I can see how that would cause Celtics fans to be like, we don't need him. But he was vitally important 2 years ago. And why was that? Because he did a credible job guarding Giannis, especially in the first chunk of that series in the Eastern Conference semis. And it's because he's at the wing position, a fire hydrant. He's huge and strong, low center of gravity, has good defensive anticipation. And they don't really have another guy like that on the roster, unfortunately, with his size at the forward position. And that's important because if you run into Giannis again, suddenly Grant Williams does become more valuable. So again, I want to just caution Celtics fans. I don't think it's going to make or break the season. But before you just say sayonara to Grant Williams, he served a purpose. He's a very specific type of forward, a big, strong, low center of gravity forward that can slide his feet and stay in front of power players. You didn't play a power player last year, so you didn't need him. But you will. He does have a distinct purpose in the league as that type of forward. They added Delano Banton from the Raptors, O'Shea Brissett from the Pacers, Wenyen Gabriel from the Lakers, a really athletic, try-hard forward that can do a lot of dirty work. Lamar Stevens played with the Cavs last year. Svi Mykhailiuk, shooter. And then Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis, who we'll talk about in just a minute. I want to start with the depth chart. So at guard, the depth chart right now, Jrue Holiday, Derek White, Peyton Pritchard, Svi Mykhailiuk. Kind of a similar situation to the Lakers where it's 3 starter caliber players and then not a lot of depth. So obviously injuries over the course of the season at the guard position could be an issue, but not too much when you've got the type of perimeter talent you do at forward. So you got Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, O'Shea Brissett, Delano Banton, Sam Hauser, and Lamar Stevens. And then at center, Kristaps Porzingis, Al Horford, Luke Cornett, and Wenyen Gabriel. So I want to talk about the Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis additions for a minute. These are massive upgrades at their 2 weakest positions last year. I thought their best players were Derek White, Jayson Tatum, and Jaylen Brown. I mean, even over the course of that Heat series, you could really tell Derek White became one of the more reliable half-court guys, especially with the way that Jaylen Brown was falling apart. So, those are your 3 best players at the 2, 3, 4, right? But the problem obviously, Marcus Smart went down a level defensively last year. Jrue Holiday is just a lot better at everything that Marcus Smart does. He's just a better version of Marcus Smart. And then at the center position, the problem you had was when you went 5 out with Al Horford, your offense looked better, but your defense wasn't as good. And when you went with Robert Williams and you played Al Horford at the 4, you had to take a perimeter player off the floor, or if Al Horford was off the floor, you weren't as good offensively because Robert Williams isn't the same type of offensive spacing threat that Al Horford was, right? Porzingis brings the best of both worlds to the table. He gives you the ability to have legitimate rim protection like what Robert Williams brings to the table, legitimate vertical spacing like what Robert Williams brings to the table, while at the same time having the perimeter spacing that Al Horford brought to the table, right? And the little bit of off-the-dribble pop that you didn't really get from either of them, right? So, it's massive upgrades at both positions. And it matters for a couple of different reasons because, now they can actually go to that rim protection without sacrificing offense, which was a significant issue in the years past. You've significantly upgraded one of your most important players in Marcus Smart. Jrue Holiday is legitimately a top 30 player in this NBA. Some people think he's top 20. Some people think he's top 30. It depends on who you ask. I had him just outside my top 25, so somewhere between 25 to 30. I think I had him in that 25 or 26, 27, 28, 29 group. I can't remember exactly where. But he's a super valuable playoff player too with his defensive versatility. And then again, specifically with Miami, you had issues with switching. The book is out on the Boston Celtics. If you switch screens against them, you will bait them into ISOs. If you bait them into ISOs, Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown just aren't good enough at it in a slow down, physical playoff environment against the best defenses in the league, right? But now you've added additional weapons in that situation, specifically Porzingis. Jrue Holiday can beat switches too. He's a better post-up guard too than Marcus Smart, in my opinion. But if you look at it's strictly from the standpoint of Kristaps Porzingis. Now, when you run Tatum Porzingis action or Brown Porzingis action, and they switch, you have another way that you can attack, which is go to Kristaps Porzingis. And again, with Kristaps, it's not just like pound the basketball, right shoulder fade, left shoulder fade, like tough shot making out of the post. He also legitimately is a good like duck-in sealer. And what that means is like he can get a switch, and then like when the dude tries to three-quarter front, he can turn and give you a target and seal and catch and quick finish around the basket. Like a big part of his post-up efficiency last year is that it wasn't just slow down, methodical shot making in the post. He did a lot of work on quick duck-ins and sealing a front and creating a target, right? And like making easy shots out of the post. I thought the Marcus Smart trade too kind of gave them the ability to give Peyton Pritchard a legitimate spot in the rotation, right? Like you get rid of Smart, you get rid of Brogdon, you bring in Jrue Holiday. Now you have two really good guards in front of Peyton Pritchard instead of three. And that's the thing is like Peyton Pritchard is like a legitimate, really good NBA guard who was out of the rotation most of the time just because he had three legitimate, really good guards in front of him. And every playoff rotation shrinks, right? And he's been shooting the shit out of the basketball in preseason. He's 9 for 15 on pull-up jump shots. Peyton Pritchard, 7 for 13 on pull-up threes. And some really nasty ones, too. There's a play in the preseason game last night against the Sixers where I want to say it was DeAnthony Melton was guarding Peyton Pritchard and did a really nice job navigating a ball screen and was just being a pester and just being a pest, I should say. And then literally he ends up running and resetting, doesn't get discouraged, resets, does a better job setting up DeAnthony Melton on the next one, gets him into trail position, then snakes the screen because Melton was doing a really good job with ball pressure. After he snakes the screen, he pulled out of it with a step back three to the top of the key. Like an incredibly high-level shot-making possession. And so I'm just kind of excited for Peyton, especially off of the extension, that now he's going to have a real chance to be just a consistent spot in the rotation. That's just a better use of your resources. Again, in terms of resource management, it doesn't make sense to have really good basketball players out of your rotation. And if you do, you should probably consider making some sort of move to try to turn that player into a position group where you need help. And that's the thing. You had too many good guards last year, and you got rid of one. And now, as a result, you're going to provide an opportunity for a guard that you had outside of the rotation last year. Now, one of the big things I've seen in terms of criticism or negativity surrounding the Celtics this year is the depth debate, right? So, last year you just had more good players coming off the bench. And if you look at the depth chart, like it's a drop-off, right? Like we go from Jrue Holiday and Derek White to Peyton Pritchard, who I really like and I think is a very good player, but a guy who historically hasn't been in the rotation, right? Svi Mikhailo, that's a big drop-off. At forward, Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, like that's a really good. That's two superstars, right? In the start at the top, but then it's a big drop off to go to O'Shea Brissett, Delano Banton, Sam Hauser, Lamar Stevens, right? From Kristaps Porzingis and Al Horford, you drop off to Luke Cornett and Wenyen Gabriel, right? So they don't have the depth that they did in previous seasons. But like again, I'm not as worried about that because star depth is equally important in my opinion because of the ability to create small roles. I talk about this all the time on the show, but you have roles on the floor, responsibilities that have to be fulfilled. And the beautiful thing about stars is they can take big chunks out of it, right? Like when you have a really good shot blocking center like Kristaps Porzingis, everybody's defensive job gets easier, right? Because there's real rim protection on the floor. When you have a outstanding shot creator, it makes all of your role players' jobs easier because they get easier spot-up opportunities. And that's the beautiful thing is like you've got 4 dudes, 5 really, if you count Porzingis, that can help you create shots. And so even if 2 of them are out of the lineup for whatever reason, it's going to be role players alongside 3 outstanding shot creators that can help your team generate high-quality spot-up looks. On the defensive end and on the offensive end, when you have stars that fulfill responsibilities, and again, all 5 of those guys are good defenders. Jrue Holiday, maybe the best perimeter defender in the league. Derek White, the best shot blocking guard in the league, and a very, very good defensive guard. Jayson Tatum, 2 years ago, was the best perimeter defender in the league, in my opinion. He shut down Kevin Durant in a playoff series. Right? Jaylen Brown, 2 years ago, was a very good defensive player. All of these Celtics guys had bad defensive seasons last year. We'll talk about that in a minute. And then Kristaps Porzingis is a legitimate rim protector. So they all take significant chunks of the responsibilities on both ends of the floor. The roles that you're going to ask guys to fill are going to be small and achievable roles. So I'm not as worried about their depth because they have so much star depth. And I'd argue that's every bit as important. Two other things I want to hit before we get to a prediction. The defensive intensity thing. So I said this after the Nets series 2 years ago, but I thought that Boston Celtics defense in the playoff run where they went to the finals was the best defense that I've seen in this era. In the half court. They were bad transition defense, but it wasn't even because they were a bad transition defense. It was because they kept putting themselves in precarious transition situations by blowing shots at the rim, falling down and complaining to the refs while they're running the other way with an advantage, right? But in the half court, they were a stifling, frightening defensive team. And then last year, they went down a huge level from there. And again, like, I know you look at the defensive ratings and you look at where they rank and you're like, oh, they still were one of the best defenses in the league. Yeah, they were another one of the good defenses in the league last year. 2 years ago, they were miles better than everybody. The entire second half of the year, they were comfortably above everybody in the league defensively. And in the playoffs, they were comfortably above everybody defensively. That's what got them to within one crazy Steph Curry performance of having a 3-1 lead in the finals. And so, like, again, I think just from the standpoint of commitment, I just want to see this year the level of intensity return. I want to see the level of give a shit return. Because this team is extremely talented, but they are not going to be a good enough half-court offense to not be the very best defense in the league comfortably. And so that's something to keep an eye on this year. And then lastly, Jayson Tatum's late game execution. I have thought about this Celtics team so much in preseason because of the Jrue Holiday trades and how good Kristaps Porzingis has looked, right? Like, it's hard not to be super excited if you're a Celtics fan, and I get that. But time and time again over the years, every time the Celtics have brought in additional firepower, the ball has ended up in Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown's hands at the end of series. And look, Jayson Tatum kind of started to click a little bit at the end of the Heat series before he got hurt. But for the most part last year in the postseason, really struggled with half-court shot creation at the end of games when things slowed down. And so, like, they can run away with the number 1 seed, and they can look fantastic and win 60 games and blow out everybody in the first round and maybe even blow out everybody in the second round. But if they end up in a series with Milwaukee, who do you trust at the end of a game to execute more in the half court? Damian Lillard and Giannis or Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown? Because at the end of the day, that's where the ball's going to end up. And I believe genuinely that Jayson Tatum is going to become one of those guys. He's going to become one of the best half-court surgeons in the league. The question is, will it be this year? Or will it be next year? Or will it be the following year? Right? Because we saw him run into Steph Curry and really struggle and get out-executed. Last year when push came to shove, Jimmy Butler was able to make the plays at the end of games, and Jayson Tatum was not. So, like, that sort of thing is going to be what ends up determining the ultimate ceiling of this team. And right now, that's an unknown. And that, to me, is kind of the difference maker. That's why I have them down at 3. I think the Celtics have the best roster in the NBA with the highest ceiling. But I've thought that same thing now 3 years in a row. I thought it in 2022. I thought it in 2023. I thought it in 2024. This is the 2024 season, right? But it just that's not what actually wins the title. What wins the title is the combination of whatever your defensive ceiling is and your defensive versatility and your ability to execute in the half court at the end of games. And that's just a big question mark at this point. And so at that, I can't put them above Milwaukee or Denver when I just trust Dame and Giannis or Jokic and Murray more at the end of close games when things slow down. All right, a couple mailbag questions. Beyond the clear contenders, what team do you think has the best chance to make a finals or championship run? As unlikely as it can be, I'm really high on the Timberwolves. I really like the Timberwolves too. I think they're going to be one of the best defenses in the league this year. They've got some of that Celtics potential like I was just talking about. The problem is once again, late game half-court shot creation. Like, do I trust Anthony Edwards, who I really like and I think is ascending into superstardom, but he reminds me a lot of like, LeBron in the late 2010s as a half-court shot creator, where it's like on any given one-game sample size, if his pull-up jump shot's going, he can be like really good because he's such a gifted athlete and he's got that alpha dog mentality. But the problem is like he's just not quite as polished as some of these other half-court guys. And so I don't think the Timberwolves can win the title just because inevitably they're going to run into somebody who out-executes them at the end of games. The two teams that I'd put that weren't in my top six, right? So my top six were, Bucks Nuggets somewhere 1-2, Celtics at 3, Lakers at 4, the Suns at 5, the Warriors at 6. Those are my top 6, and the Warriors are a clear 6, and then the top 5 I kind of all have on the same tier, but I all think those are the top-tier contenders, or top 2-tier contenders, whatever, serious contenders. But then there's a little bit of a drop-off, right? And I would say the Clippers, obviously, you always have to keep track of, just because if they're healthy, they're super talented, and they have one of the top 5 in a vacuum stars in the league. Like, if Kawhi's healthy, he's a top 5 player. That's just a fact. It's just he's never healthy, right? But you always have to consider them as a threat. And then the Heat, because they're going to eventually make a trade, I would think. And if they do, and you give enough talent to Eric Spoelstra and Jimmy Butler and Bam Adebayo, they can be a problem for teams. What do you think about the difference in opinions between Tatum and Brown? This is a really good question, by the way. What I've realized is that hoopers are much higher on Jaylen than Tatum, and journalists and analysts are higher on Tatum compared to Brown. Tatum is indeed the better player, but I was wondering what your thoughts are on this observation. Hoopers are always going to be drawn to like creative shot making. And Jayson Tatum is a very analytically sound player, especially last year, because he basically started getting rid of the mid-range and taking just threes and layups, right? So analytically, he's always going to appeal a lot to people. And then I think Jayson Tatum's a better defender than Jaylen Brown too. To be clear, Tatum is a better player than Brown. But what draws people to Jaylen Brown is that creativity. My thing is like there is value there. And in a lot of situations in like a final possession, I'm like, give the ball to Jaylen Brown. He's just a little bit more creative off the bounce, right? But at the end of the day, like even then, Jayson Tatum is like a bigger, better athlete that allows him to get more separation, even when he is just going to take another three, right? And so, I mean, again, like I understand why basketball players are drawn to that sort of thing, and God knows I think Jaylen Brown's really good, but I think Jayson Tatum is like clearly the better player. And even though I am a basketball player myself, I would imagine that I fall into that hooper category to some extent, and I like those things about Jaylen Brown, but that's not enough to put him over the top for me. Last one, a non-basketball question. What would it take for Mass Effect to return to greatness? This is completely random and a question I'm really happy about. Just to talk about something different for a minute. So I used to be bigger into video games when I was younger, not so much anymore. But I've always been really big into sci-fi, and specifically like I'm really fascinated by like deep storytelling. You know, that's why I'm drawn to Star Wars, and that's why I have my Star Wars podcast. And on that podcast, I also cover Lord of the Rings when they come out with stuff. So we did Rings of Power season 1, right? House of the Dragon, Game of Thrones, all those like long drawn out sagas, storylines where there's deep storytelling I've always been attracted to. And Mass Effect is like that in a video game, right? Like there's books, there's extensive storytelling about how the human race discovered, that Pluto was this frozen, gate to the rest of the universe, so to speak. I won't get into the meat and potatoes of it, but like, I really appreciated that about that game, and I got really invested in it. And I, like most Mass Effect fans, played Mass Effect 1, played Mass Effect 2, played Mass Effect 3, loved them all. But then I played Mass Effect Andromeda, and I got through it, but I was bored most of the time. Didn't think it was very good other than the graphics. And it was repetitive, and it was boring. And it just felt like kind of like a miss, right? But again, like I think one of the most important things to any sort of storytelling is to have a truly terrifying villain, right? Like think about the villains in the other 3 sagas that I mentioned. In Star Wars, like Palpatine is literally one of the most terrifying villains in the history of storytelling, right? And his plan to overthrow the Republic was genius, and now he's got the Death Star and all this other stuff, right? Go to Lord of the Rings. Like Sauron and Morgoth and everything surrounding the good versus evil. You have this truly terrifying entity that is the enemy. And then same thing goes for Game of Thrones. Like the White Walkers are this mysterious and terrifying entity. And that's what the Reapers were in Mass Effect. And like, I remember, some of you guys probably remember playing, but like you'd talk to the Reapers and you'd have this conversation with this artificial intelligence. And it was like scary how like ruthless and logical they were about how they have to exterminate life. And they're like, oh, you don't understand. Like, we have to kill you because it's what's best for you, basically. And it was terrifying. And then obviously you combine just the unbelievable firepower and defense that the Reapers have. And they kind of look like those giant squids, right? They're kind of scary looking. The Reapers were just like a legitimately terrifying villain. And they went a really weird direction with Andromeda by leaving that galaxy entirely. And so you didn't have some of the kind of cool part of exploration that you had. And then I can't even remember the name of the villain. And I remember it's been so long since I played that story that is weird. But they had like that other villain out there that was like doing genetic manipulation, where they were like creating other beings out of like their genetic material or something like that. But it just wasn't that interesting and not that scary. You know what I mean? And so that's kind of what ruined it. So like, what can return Mass Effect to greatness is come back to the original galaxy and come up with something that's terrifying. It wouldn't be too hard to do. That's what's kind of appealing about the Ahsoka series, right? Is like, what the hell is it that Balin's going after out there, right? There's something scary out there that he's going after. So good question. I'm always down for mailbag questions that are not related to basketball. It just helps us get through the grind of an NBA season and off season. All right, guys, that's all I have for today. As always, I sincerely appreciate your support. We'll be back tomorrow with probably some more preseason reaction and eventually the top 2 in our power rankings. I appreciate you guys, and I'll see you tomorrow.